My name is Gabriel Piemonte, and I'm a candidate for the position of 5th Ward Alderman. I want to talk to you today about the rupture of our local economic infrastructure. This is the second of a series of videos that I'm doing with respect to our local economy, local economics. The first was regarding a concept that I've adapted to our situation, which is known as extractive investment. This is a focus on the conditions that we find ourselves in with respect to our local economy and why we're uniquely challenged in terms of being able to restart our commercial corridors, our housing market, all of the elements that we would like to see be more robust that we're challenged with. And so the basic principle that I'm trying to express when I talk about this rupture is that we are below a certain threshold at which it becomes more or less challenging to rebuild a local economy. So above the threshold, we're not at a point of rupture, we're just at a point of distress. And I think that it's often the case that Southside communities are in a state of distress or are fighting against the conditions that could create that state, but that when you drop below a certain level, you're in a set of circumstances that make it extraordinarily difficult even to get basic economic circulation working. So in our case, we're talking about, for example, on 71st Street, we're talking about a more than 50% vacancy rate in our storefronts. In Woodlawn, on 63rd Street, we don't have the storefronts to have a vacancy rate. It's gone so far that the buildings have been torn down. There's a complete absence. That's going to be an extraordinary challenge to address. In any case, these commercial issues are single-family home foreclosure rates, are challenges with our apartment buildings. All have some components that are related to each other. And when I talk about rupture, one of the huge elements that I'm talking about is that what all of these have in common is that when they're locally owned, they're part of a network of assets that make it possible to accomplish things in the neighborhood that it's a lot more difficult to do without. Another really important piece to this is the absence of a local financial institution. So when you have significant levels of vacant homes or homes that have been foreclosed on, when you have lots of apartment buildings that aren't locally owned, when you have huge vacancy rates in a commercial corridor, and also a lot of ownership that's outside of the community, then what you end up with is what we could describe as estranged assets. We have assets that are outside and inaccessible to us. And certainly when you don't have a local financial institution, re-establishing some of that local ownership is much harder. So what ends up happening in instances where you have a challenge where you still do own property locally is that you're not surrounded by other folks with a robust asset portfolio. So because you've got lots of homes that are either owned by people out of the neighborhood or are really not owned by anybody, they're owned by a bank, each one of those represents a neighbor that might have been able to help you out as you're trying to start a business or bridge a tough time with the business, or if you're having a hard time at your job or through some personal crisis and you're trying to make it through a difficult financial situation. Likewise, without a local financial institution, you can't apply for a bridge loan for that difficult time. You're essentially being stripped of an asset context, a situation where you have alternatives, places to go. You yourself potentially don't have the range of resources that you might have when there are fewer homes that are owned by people, when there are fewer businesses that are owned by people. And so the aggregate effect is that you've got a lot of folks that no longer have those assets, so they're struggling. Maybe they were homeowners and now they're renting. Maybe they owned property in the neighborhood, and when they lost that property to somebody from out of the neighborhood or even out of state, they're no longer invested in the neighborhood. They've moved on, or they in some other way are less engaged. The collective effect is that the folks who live here on a whole are less likely to own property, are less likely to have the economic power that makes it easier to be influential, and it shows. So when we get to a point of economic rupture, we also get to a point of political rupture, because we can't approach local elected officials in the ways that are most respected, for better or for worse. We know that what people want to know, sure, they want to know if you're registered to vote, but you'll always see you'll see the staff of an alderman, for example, trying to suss out who is a property owner, who is a homeowner, when they're having a conversation about an issue in the neighborhood. That's real. It indicates that when you have a lower rate of property ownership, you're going to have a lower level of political impact. This is really the extent of what I want to talk about in this one video, because I think this is another crucial building block. So the first time I started talking on these videos about economics, I talked about extractive investment. When people say they're bringing money into your community and it's going to improve things, and in fact it strips resources from your neighborhood. Now I'm talking about the rupture of the local economic infrastructure, and giving some details about that. Each one of these is a piece of the puzzle, and what I'm hoping to do is, by the end of this short collection of videos, to have painted a picture that then is going to make it possible for me to talk more constructively about what we can do to repair the situation we find ourselves in. Thanks very much for your time.